Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Envision IT Extranet User Manager webinar on Extranets in SharePoint and Office 365. Forgot to update the date. It's actually May 26th today. I'll have to do that in the published copy. So let me take you through quick introductions here. My name is Peter Carson. I'm the president of Envision IT, also a SharePoint MVP and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. All my contact information is in the slide deck here, and we're going to be publishing the deck as well as the recording from the webinar up on our website. So look for that probably by, if not end of day today, by early tomorrow. And we'll send an email out to everybody who registered so that you've got a link to be able to pull that down from there. Not on the call today, unfortunately. Dinesh is on vacation this week. He's our Director of Products and really the brainchild behind the Extranet User Manager product. So he's unfortunately not going to be able to answer questions as we go through. We do have Amanda DeCosta on the line. She'll be able to answer non-technical questions for you, and then we're going to hold some time at the end of the session, and I'll field those questions. So by all means, have the have your questions, post them in as we go through, and we won't be answering them as we go through the session itself, but I'll hold a little bit of time at the end of the hour to make sure that we've got time to look at those. All right, quick agenda of what we want to cover off in the next 60 minutes or so. So we're going to start with a quick introduction to Extranet, kind of level set and set some background from that point of view. I'm going to take you through a couple different scenarios of how you could light up an Extranet, talk about licensing from a Microsoft point of view, as well as from an Extranet User Manager point of view. And then we'll get into our product itself, what its features and benefits are, and we're going to intersperse some different demos both on Office 365 and on SharePoint on-premises, including client demos as part of that as we go through the process. And as I mentioned, we'll do a wrap-up and Q&A at the end of the session. So just to begin with, defining what an extranet is. Not everybody knows exactly what that term defines. It's really a website accessible to users outside of your organization. So you've got partners, customers, vendors, what have you, that you want to collaborate with, and rather than emailing documents back and forth using Dropboxes or other external file sharing services, FTP sites, lots of different ways that people collaborate. SharePoint and Extranets are a much better way to do that. There's better governance around that. You can better manage it. It can be delivered in a number of different ways as well. It could be an extension of your public website. And as we go through some of the examples with client implementations, we're going to show you examples of those, as well as where clients have just exposed out a secure portion of their corporate intranet, or they have a standalone extranet as part of their implementation. Lots of different types of people that could be coming into an extranet. I mean, you may be a volunteer or a charitable organization. You've got members or volunteers as part of that. You're a for-profit organization. You've got customers. Really any type of organization typically has vendors and suppliers that they work with, maybe partners, a board of directors. They may have many different committee members. Government organization reaching out to citizens, educational, researchers, tenants from a property management point of view. We see a lot of different examples in the work that we do. So you may focus in on one particular example of an extranet user initially with your portal, but then you may broaden that beyond that. You say, well, we want to start with a customer portal, but once we've got that infrastructure in place, it makes sense to bring vendors into that as well, or suppliers, and have their own separate part of the portal for them to collaborate with us from that point of view. So that's really one of the first considerations that we think about when we're talking to clients about implementing an extranet, is who is coming into the extranet, and does everyone see the same information? Is it strictly a secure publishing portal where the same content is provided out to everybody, or is it more collaboration? And maybe in the example of a customer portal, each customer may have their own site and their own private information that only they see within that. So that guides where we're going from a security point of view, how we're going to be setting things up. Is there some sort of member database or CRM database that we need to interface in with? Is that part of the registration process, or does that actually drive the invitations out to the system? How do people actually discover the extranet? Do they get invited in? Can they self-discover it because it's part of your public website? They can then self-register and come in through that process. And if they do that, who approves those new registrations? How does that work? Is it a single set of approvers, or is there questions on the registration? And we'll show you examples here where, depending on how you answer the registration questions, it's going to drive different approval processes through there. And is it just the extranet that they're coming into, or is there single sign-on to other systems? And again, we'll talk about examples here where we're providing access not only into a SharePoint extranet, but into other third-party SaaS applications or custom-built applications, websites, etc., that are all managed through a single sign-on experience through that. So we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We're very focused on Microsoft technologies, and that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. I mean, you can build extranets in a lot of different ways, but we're going to focus in on doing that from a Microsoft stack point of view. We started out by building extranets on SharePoint. That was really our primary focus initially, and our first versions of our product a couple of years ago were very baked into SharePoint itself. We're going to talk in a minute about how we changed that, primarily to support Office 365, but it also gave us a lot of benefits with single sign-on to other systems and making it much easier to install the product even on-premise into SharePoint as well. So those are the two main platforms that we're targeting, but as I mentioned, we work with clients to support a lot of other different applications as part of their extranet. Azure is something we leverage. We provide a hosted version of Extranet User Manager. We host that up in Azure in Microsoft Cloud. And then, of course, there's our Extranet User Manager product itself that we're going to be talking more about from a technology point of view. So before we dive into that, I want to get a quick sense of how are people using SharePoint today. I'm assuming that you've got some experience with it. It's already in place at your organization, and you're looking to expose an extranet out through as part of that. So let's just open up a poll here. And if you can just give me a sense, you can answer more than one. If you've got both, say, Office 365 and on-premises SharePoint, check those both off. We've added the SharePoint Server 2016. That's gone to general availability now, so it's out there. Haven't seen a lot of clients, obviously, up on it yet, but a lot of discussions around moving to it, migrating to it, a lot of hybrid scenarios where SharePoint Server 2016 and Office 365 is a nice combination where you can't, or not allowed to do maybe everything you want to do in the cloud. That makes a lot of sense there as well. From a technology support point of view, I mean, we support all of these platforms with the exception of the last one. The MOS 2007, Windows SharePoint Services, those are just too old. They have a different authentication mechanism that we don't support. But even SharePoint Server or Foundations 2010, we fully support that. In fact, the authentication model was significantly revamped as part of 2010. It stayed effectively the same in 2013, 2016, moving forward from there. So we can use a single product installation and support all of those. In fact, if you've got a hybrid environment where maybe you've got multiple SharePoint farms running different versions, you can actually use Extranet User Manager. Again, you could provide single sign-on to 2010, 2013, 2016, and Office 365 all out of a single installation. So it's quite flexible from that point of view. Let me share this poll back out with everybody here. About half the attendees running on Office 365. Very cool to see, about 7% already on SharePoint Server 2016. So some early adopters there, that's great to see. 2/3 on SharePoint 2013 and about half on 2010. So obviously people are running more than one environment. We've got more than 100% results there. We've got people maybe in both Office 365 as well as 2013, 2010. A few folks still on 2007, WSS 3.0. Really want to look at upgrading that to a more current platform or moving that right into Office 365. We do a lot of those upgrade kind of projects, can certainly help you out from that perspective as well. Just one more quick poll that I want to do here, which is just getting a sense of how people use SharePoint today. So is it strictly from an internal collaboration point of view and you want to light that up for an extranet? Maybe you've got your staff portal, your intranet already on SharePoint. That's a very common workload that we see a lot of. Perhaps you already have an extranet. You're looking to improve the user experience around that. That's certainly something we can help with. Or you're running your public-facing website on SharePoint, which is a nice scenario because it means you've already published SharePoint to the internet. It makes it much easier then to bring in other non-anonymous users as part of a private extranet part of that site. So maybe a few more seconds just to answer the last few through the poll there. And then we'll close that out, share that back. So pretty even, both internal collaboration and internal web publishing or intranet, almost everybody using it from that point of view, and that's consistent with market research that Microsoft does, that the penetration of SharePoint into the intranet space in the corporate world is extremely high. So there's a lot of use of SharePoint from that point of view. but about half of you using it from an Extranet's point of view. So hopefully we've got some tidbits here today on how to improve on that experience, how our product can provide additional benefit there, and a small portion using it from a public-facing website point of view. Certainly layering the Extranet onto that makes a lot of sense as well. Okay, let me just hide that out. We'll come back to our deck. So what I want to start with is I'm going to get technical for a bit and talk about how people log into SharePoint. How do we do authentication? And the story is a little bit different depending on whether you're on-premise or in the cloud. So we're going to start with the on-premise side. So imagine you're running SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016, doesn't really matter. These three options that I'm going to go through here apply to all three of those. And the first is called Windows Authentication. What this means is you've logged into your corporate PC and you're now going to your staff portal on SharePoint, and it just passes through your Windows credentials. So it knows that you've logged on to a domain computer through Active Directory, and it passes those credentials into SharePoint, and away you go from there. You never actually see a login form. Now, the second option is called forms-based authentication, and what this means is that there's a web form, an HTML form that comes up before you can get into SharePoint that you provide your username and password to. Under that hood, that could still go to Active Directory, could go to a SQL database, and it's called what's a claims-based authentication. And this is how our older version of the product worked. We installed that form into SharePoint, and it became part of the authentication process. It was fairly high touch. There was a lot of things we had to change in SharePoint to make that work properly. So we've moved to a federated identity model here. And what this means is that when you go to SharePoint, SharePoint's what's called a relying party, and there's a trusted identity provider, which in this case is our Extranet User Manager. So it acts as the identity provider to SharePoint. When I hit SharePoint and it doesn't know who I am, it redirects me over to the login page. I put in my credentials, again against AD or SQL underneath the hood, and it provides what's called a token back to SharePoint. It says, you trust me, this is the person that just logged in, let them into SharePoint, let them do whatever they're allowed to do from that point of view. That's kind of the three main options, and we're going to dive more into the federated identity one in terms of how we do that with Extranet User Manager. A little bit different on Office 365. In that scenario, how many people first experience Office 365 is with what's called a cloud identity. So whoever set up your tenant, whether you've done that yourself or somebody within your organization has done that, they create an account for you in Windows Azure Active Directory. So that's a cloud-based resource that's provided by Microsoft. There's no integration to your on-premises, and basically you log in with a password stored up in the cloud. Now, if you want to integrate that in with your on-premises Active Directory to say, well, I want all my staff who have AD accounts in my network to automatically have accounts up in the cloud, you run a tool called, used to be called DirSync. I should update the slide. It's now called Windows Azure Connect. Basically what it does is it takes all the users from your on-premise Active Directory and it synchronizes them up into the cloud, so they exist up there. And then you can apply permissions and allow users into Office 365 from there. It will also do a password sync. Now it doesn't actually send your password in the cloud, so you don't need to worry about that from a security point of view. What it does is it puts a hash of the password, puts that up in the cloud. So then you can log in to Office 365 using the same password that you logged into your on-premises corporate PC. You still have to log in twice, but you don't have to remember a second password, so it's nice from that point of view. And the third, coming back to what we saw on the on-premises SharePoint called federated identity. And what happens here is that when you hit Office 365, it redirects to your identity provider, which could be, say, Active Directory Federation services for your on-premises users for single sign-on, but it can also be Extranet User Manager. So we can actually be the broker for the users to sign into Office 365. And if I've lost you in the technical weeds there a bit, it'll make more sense in a minute when we go through some client demos and kind of walk you through what that looks like. But I just wanted to explain basically how are we connecting to either Office 365 or SharePoint on-premises. Okay, so let's get into a couple of scenarios from a business point of view from an Extranet perspective. There's kind of two main scenarios that we see, either a secure publishing portal where there's information that you want to provide out to your external audience in a secure way. You don't want to be emailing all these documents out to them, that you want them to be able to come into a portal, discover, search, find the information that they need, consume that information. And the other is a collaboration space where it's more than just publishing information out to that external audience. You actually want to make them part of your collaborations. You want to work together on, say, Office documents, Word documents, Excel documents, PowerPoints, things like that. SharePoint is an ideal place to collaborate together on that. So rather than having, say, a committee group of your board of directors with 20 members on it, emailing a bunch of documents back and forth as they're working on it, that quickly gets out of control. What you want to have happen is a single place for them to all go to and see a single version of the truth, where those documents live in that collaboration space. You can even have multiple authors working on those documents at the same time, so they can, if they're using modern versions of the Office products, like the 2016 release of Word and Excel and such, they could have multiple people editing a single Word document at the same time. It's called co-authoring. Very cool, very handy from a collaboration point of view. Now, the other part of the scenarios is, where is this all installed? Could be installed on premises, in your SharePoint servers, in your corporate environment, or it could be up in the cloud in Office 365. And the same applies with our product itself. I mean, we can sell you a license that you install on premise into your servers, or we can host that on your behalf in Azure, and we manage that for you, so you don't need to worry about keeping that current and up to date and running. Okay, so what are some scenarios for doing this, either secure publishing or collaboration spaces? Well, if you're in Office 365, Microsoft, of course, will explain there's an external sharing feature, and I want to be transparent and upfront, say, hey, this is a way to build an extranet. It allows you to have unlimited free external users come into your Office 365. There are some caveats, though. They have to use the Microsoft login form. So if you're concerned about branding and experience, there's going to be a bit of a disconnect there. They're going to go from your portal to this Microsoft login form, and they have to actually use a Microsoft account to sign in. So they have to register with Microsoft, not with you, to get that account. There's not a lot of control around what account gets used to accept that invitation. You can invite somebody in with a particular email address. They can choose to use a different personal Hotmail Microsoft account to accept that invitation and come into your extranet. So it does make sense in some scenarios, but as you get into a bigger extranet where you want some governance and controls around there, it really is a lightweight solution. I mean, it's just not intended for a broader corporate extranet. You could use on-premises forms-based authentication. In fact, our one main competitor still does this, to say, okay, we have a forms-based login form that lets you come into SharePoint. It supports on-premises SharePoint 2010 and 2013. It's not appropriate for Office 365. Like I mentioned, it's deeply integrated into SharePoint. We helped that process by having an installation wizard to make it easier to go through that, but it's still a lot of touch points from that point of view. And there's no single sign-on. You can't go to other systems beyond SharePoint through that. So my favorite, obviously, is the federated identities. That's the one that we've settled on. We can use a single solution, a single approach, technically, that'll work both on premises with SharePoint and with Office 365. So that's key to us as a product company. We don't want to maintain two different products. It's also key to you that you've got a single installation that you can use today for on-premises, and you transition to the cloud, you can support both of them. Maybe you shut down your on-premises, now you're just supporting your Office 365. You haven't changed your extranet solution through that journey. It's a very light integration. There's not a lot to be done to install the product. There's basically a script and a certificate that our installer provides you that you either run against your on-premises SharePoint or your Office 365. So pretty straightforward from that point of view. And like I mentioned, it provides single sign-on to other systems. It's using XAML, which is a security asset markup language. It's an industry standard way of doing security authentication that's supported by lots of different vendors. So it's not something that's just for SharePoint. Okay. So you've decided, you know what, I'd like to do an extranet. I'm not sure whether I want to do it on premises with SharePoint or with Office 365. What are my licensing implications from that point of view? Unfortunately, licensing conversations with Microsoft can get very confusing very quickly. We've tried to simplify things down for the most part here. So when SharePoint 2013 was released, to Microsoft's credit, they did simplify the extranet licensing piece. And the same licensing, I believe, applies for 2016 as well. Basically, what you need is every server that you're going to install SharePoint onto, whether it's web front ends, app servers, doesn't matter, you need a SharePoint server license for that. And then every internal user that comes in to use that SharePoint site, unless it's a purely public-facing website, needs a CAL, a client access license. But the nice thing is that your external users don't need any CAL. So once you pay for the server license and your internal users are licensed, and then probably are already to use your staff portal, your intranet, there's no additional licensing for your extranet. You could license 100 internal users to use that portal and have 10,000 external users through there. No additional impact from a licensing point of view. So that's very nice from that point of view. I mean, there are other Microsoft licenses you need to build up your SharePoint farm. You need a SQL Server license. You need Windows Servers licenses for your various different servers and such. But from a pure SharePoint point of view, it's just the server license and CALs for your internal users. Now, something to think about if you're spinning up a SharePoint farm for an extranet on premises is also to look at your Office web apps, which they've recently renamed as part of the 2016 release. It's now Office Online server, which honestly doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not an online server, it's something on premises, but whatever, that's their decision. Basically what this is a browser-based version of the Office clients. So if you've got external users that you want to collaborate with on Word documents, on Excels, on PowerPoints, maybe they don't even have a license to use Office, they can use the browser-based versions for that. This needs to install on its own server once for everybody to use, but there's no additional licensing required for that. So all of your external users can both read and edit documents. There's no requirement for them to have an Office client license for that. The only person that needs a client license is if your staff are using it not to read, they don't need a license for that, but to edit documents, they need to have a desktop license. You know, they don't need it on the computer that they're using at that point in time. That's the whole point of it. They could be on anything. They could be on their iPad editing that Word document. As long as they're licensed, they're fine from that point of view. So Microsoft, to their credit, has really simplified things from that licensing point of view. Now, the Office 365, unfortunately, is not as clean cut. So there's a number of different things to think about here. So the first is that, yes, if external users are coming in through the Microsoft external sharing using a Microsoft account, that scenario I described earlier, no licenses is required for those users. But if you're using our product and you're managing those accounts for those users, you want some better governance around that, unfortunately those users do need a subscription for that. So what you need to do is purchase subscriptions not only for your internal users, but your externals as well. And that can be a deal breaker for a lot of organizations. If you've got a lot of external users, those dollars can become significant. You know, if you say, okay, well, we're going to do an Office 365 Enterprise E1 and we have 1,000 external users, it's going to be $8,000 a month in subscription fee. That's probably not going to fly with a lot of organizations. I mean, you can get a SharePoint only plan for $5 a month. That's a little bit cheaper, but that can still get quite expensive as your number of users go on. A couple of solutions to that. I'm going to talk more about Azure B2B in a bit, where you can actually invite those external users in from their own Office 365 tenants with no licensing requirements there. And that's a feature that we're going to actually be adding into our product shortly. So we're actually working on that right now. The other thing is if you're a registered charity or you're an educational institution, either post-secondary or at the K-12 level, you actually get licenses for Office 365 for free from Microsoft. So if you're in that particular market space, Office 365 makes a lot of sense. If you're a for-profit or not a registered charity, not-for-profit, then you probably want to think about the B2B features that we're bringing out shortly so that you're not paying those additional subscriptions from an Office 365 point of view. So if we compare the licensing on premises versus 365 and Federation, on premises, so you need to buy the server licenses for SharePoint, for SQL, for the Windows Server. You don't need to buy CALs for your external users. You do need to purchase a license for Extranet User Manager, or, as I mentioned, we have a hosted version of that. If you're in the cloud with Office 365, you need monthly subscriptions for all your users, both internal or external, unless you're a registered charity or an educational institution, in which case you get those for free, or you want to be looking at the B2B that I'll talk about in a minute. You still need a license for EUM, either purchased or hosted as well there. So we've been talking about this thing called Extranet User Manager, but we haven't really explained what it is. Let's get into that a bit more and talk about why you want this product and what features and benefits does it provide to your organization. So there's really two sides to the product, and the idea of the product is to make it easy for business owners within your organization, or even externally, to manage those external partners that they're going to be working with. And we want to make it easy for those external partners to get invited in, to set their credentials, reset their password, all the kinds of things that they need to do to be able to come into your portal. So there's really two applications. One is for the end users, and the other is for the business owners to use. Let's go through some of the features. What I'm going to do is I go through these features, I'm going to flip back and forth to a couple different sites just to give you a sense of what that looks like. So branding is important. I mentioned if you're using the external sharing feature from Microsoft, there is actually, to their credit, a little bit of light branding that you can do on those login forms. It's fairly limited, and things like self-registration that we'll talk more about, not part of that process. Throughout the entire user experience using Extranet User Manager, it's key to us to have a strong user experience through that. So there's a consistent brand through that. It's very easy to use, works across different devices, mobile, and again, we'll talk more about that from that point of view. So this is an example up on the page of one of our client portals for Kinross Gold, global company. Let's actually flip over to my Chrome session here, and we can actually take you into some of those. If I go to the Kinross portal here, this is the actual live portal, suppliers.kinross.com, asking for a username or password. One of the things we do to make that user experience easy is use the email address as the username, and then they choose their own password from there. If they've forgotten their password, they can click on the link here and just enter their email address and request a new password email. And I'll actually take you through what that process looks like. You can see all these pages have the Kinross look and feel on them. If we go to other sites, things like Public Health Ontario, public-facing website, www.publichealthontario.ca. Again, I can come into their registration form here, and I've got the PHO look and feel throughout that. We've got a registration form embedded in on that. We've got their Chrome as part of that through that experience. Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, same sort of thing, come into a public-facing website. So at this point here, I'm still an anonymous user. I say I want to come into their members portal. The first thing I see is our login form as part of Extranet User Manager with the Boys and Girls Clubs branding on that. Again, their registration logic in there. And we'll come back to the registration in a minute. So that's key, making sure that that brand is consistent throughout that experience. So not just web pages that you see, but emails that go out as well, and we'll show you examples of those too. Single sign-on is also very important. The ability to sign into a portal once and then move into other systems from there and have your credentials passed over to those other systems from there. I can show you part of the way through on one of our client sites here. So let me actually open up an incognito window here, and I'm going to go to ocas.sharepoint.com. So OCAS is the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. So it's an umbrella organization above the 55 or so municipal children's aid societies across the province of Ontario. There's about 8,000 people that work for those organizations. So this is hosted in Office 365. It's a publishing portal, has tons of great resources for those staff at those member societies to be able to access and work with. Now, if they don't have an account on there already, they can actually come through a registration process here, register for an account. We even auto-approve their account if they come from an email domain from the member organization. We know that they work for that organization. We keep it very simple for that. This actually just went live a couple of weeks ago. As of last week, we were taking on the upwards of about 500 new registrations per day through this. So, fantastic example of how you onboard large quantities of people and bring them into your portal from there. If I come back to the main portal, I actually have an account myself on their portal. I'll just go ahead and log in here. So I was actually on the hosted DOM pages there a minute ago. Now I'm back on the Microsoft pages and back into Office 365, logged in as myself. So I can now go through all the fantastic content that the association has put up for their member staff to be able to use, but I also have a link here to go to my OCAS Learning. This is actually hosted by Desire to Learn, SaaS service. Based out of Kitchener, they provide online learning and training for tons of clients all around the world. And what they wanted was, or what the association wanted, was for staff of the member societies to be able to come into this portal here and then be able to link directly over into their OCAS Learning from there and say, oh, well, I'm an external user, let me on to the online learning portal. So we've integrated in with Shibboleth from a single sign-on point of view to say, okay, pass those credentials on. Now, I'm not actually a staff member at one of those societies, so D2L is saying, hey, you don't actually have credentials on our system. But what we actually do for the staff that are coming in as they register, we actually live create their accounts over in Desire to Learn at the same time that we're creating them on Office 365. So not only can we do the single sign-on, we can actually do the identity management around that and set up those accounts in the other systems and You'll sign on through to those systems from there. Let me come back to my deck here. This idea of home realm discovery. So this is a key feature as your internal staff are coming in to try and make that as seamless a process as possible. If I come to my, actually use our EUM site itself. So I go to eum.co, which is our shortcut to extranetusermanager.com. This is our public-facing site. You can actually register and sign in. That's what you need to do if you want to download a trial or get into the detailed documentation, is you need to register on the site first. I can click sign in here, and it already knew that I was working on premises and I'm signed into my local computer. You may not have seen it flash by. It went pretty quickly through the browser bar there, but it basically went over to our ADFS and said, hey, this is an internal user, provide me their credentials and bring me back in. So very simple for the internal user to get right into the system without requiring any sort of login page coming up from them. And that's all driven through this Easy Realm home discovery page. Basically, it's got rules in there that says, hey, is this person coming from an internal IP address? Yeah, we'll either just go over to ADFS or Windows Authentication and take them right into SharePoint. So they never actually see a login form through there. If they're coming in from the outside, we still don't know whether they're staff or not. When they type in their email address, if we see that that's coming from an internal email domain, just redirect them again back into the internal process and into SharePoint. If not, then ask them for their password. Once they successfully enter that, take them into SharePoint from there. So it makes it a very simple process for either a staff member or an external user, whether they're in our internal network or outside, to come through the cleanest path possible and get into SharePoint as quickly as possible through there. A multi-factor authentication. I'm not going to get a chance to actually show you this. I don't have it set up for my demo site just right now. But this is a new feature we launched last month. And basically the idea here is if you have a highly secure extranet, and you want to make sure that people coming in are who they say they are, having a second factor of authentication is an important way to do that. And basically what we do is we leverage Microsoft Azure and their multi-factor authentication service to do that. So when we've got a user who comes to the login form, they enter their email and their password, we have a number of rules that fire off to say, has this person logged in from this device, this IP address recently, and gone through MFA? If yes, then we don't need to do it again. Did they maybe not enter their password correctly? Did they do a forgotten password reset? Any sort of risk factors that would require a second factor authentication to go in drives through that process. And basically what happens is the login form reaches out to Azure, and Azure will actually either make a phone call or send a text message based on how you set up your profile as a user back to the person logging in. They either respond to the voice prompts on the phone or they reply to the text message, and that basically comes back to Azure and allows the login to proceed and let you into SharePoint from there. So it's this idea of something you know plus something you have. You have your phone plus you know your password. If you have both of those factors of authentication, we know you are who you say you are. We're going to let you into the site from there. So it provides an additional layer of security from that point of view. Self-registration is not a required. I mean, you can deploy our product invitation only and not have a registration process on it. But honestly, I would say the majority of our clients do use the registration process. The idea here is that it's fully customizable. You can what fields you want to add on to your registration form and what back-end approval workflows you want to have working from that. We can provide the full source code for this part of the product. So you can do those customizations yourself if you've got .NET developers that can do that. Typically, though, our clients hire us to do that work for them to build those registrations. So let's actually start with an out-of-the-box registration form, just to look at what that looks like. If I go to my demo site, which I'm going to be using in a minute from a registration point of view, and I click on the Register for a New Account, this is our out-of-the-box registration form. So name, email, address information, phone number, a little bit of company information, some profile, a CAPTCHA to fill in to make sure that robots aren't registering onto your site, and you go ahead and register from there. You may look at that and say, well, we don't need all those fields, but there's a bunch of other ones that we do need. We can add and remove fields as required from there. Some of them can be simple, like these drop-downs for country or province, or just static lookups as part of the project. Others may actually drive from your system. You may have back-end systems that you want to populate those drop-downs from, databases, things like that. We can build those sorts of integrations in as part of that. So back on the deck, we had the Public Health Ontario example up. Let's actually have a look at that one. Come back here and back into the registration form for PHO. You can see they've got email and name is basically required. Email is what's going to drive our login process, so we have to have that. And we're going to want to have names of people. But beyond that, we've got some address information, but we've got some additional information around what organization that they belong to, what sector, and even what public health unit they belong to. And this is a key piece from an approval process point of view for PHO. So as a member of the public, as a citizen of Ontario, I can go through this registration form, subscribe to a bunch of newsletters, and go ahead and save my settings, and I now have an account on the PHO site. I'll get an email, allow me to set my password, I can log in. There's not actually a lot more different that I can see, other than I can manage my subscriptions, or there may be some interactive spots where it knows my identity and can interact differently with me. But if I self-identify that I work for one of the public health units, say Toronto Public Health here, it's going to drive a completely different process. It's actually going to send the approval first to PHO and then on to Toronto Public Health to say, hey, does Peter Carson actually work for Toronto Public Health? And what role does he have there? Depending on what's answered through there, I'm going to light up different features within the site. So there's actually a lot of rich BI data, public health statistical information, analysis data that's only available to certain people within public health units. So based on how I answered this and how that approval works, I'm actually going to see different things light up in the site from there. So you see not only different approval process, but different permissions coming into the site from there. If we look at somebody like Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada, theirs is very different. This is a members portal. So the idea is that the National Association runs this site. They're not a big organization. They're 20, 25 people, but they've got over 100 clubs, 700 locations, and thousands of staff and volunteers are working at those member clubs across the country. So how do you build a community around those people? We want to make it as inclusive as possible. So in their registration, very little personal details other than name and email. The rest of it is really about your relationship with the club. What's my role? What responsibilities do I have? But also, who's my approver? Which seems an odd thing at first, but you actually name your own approver. The key is that the approver must also have a registered account already. So basically, if you know somebody who's a member of the portal, you name them, and they know you, they'll receive the approval. They have to sign in first before they can complete the approval, and then you're in. And then you could act as an approver for somebody else. So it makes it a very organic way to build that online community. Some of the G2G Marketplace, this is out of state of Michigan. The idea here is that the product is actually being used to manage access to the portal. It's actually something that's being sold through the portal as well. So the idea is this marketplace is a place for member municipalities across the U.S. to be able to source and procure pre-cleared products from a municipal vendor point of view. So they can actually create an account on the site, log in, browse through those vendors' products, interact with it through there. So again, you can see very different registration processes through each of these. Basic idea and premise is based off of the same thing through there. Supreme Court of Victoria, these are barristers and solicitors that are going to be involved in lawsuits at the Supreme Court level. Again, they need to register. They need to self-identify that they're members of the legal community. Now, we don't check that. I mean, we could actually go back to the bar records and validate that they are who they say they are. Kind of made a decision that, okay, at the end of this process, you're going to be standing in front of a Supreme Court judge, and if you're not actually a lawyer, you're going to be in a whole lot more trouble. So we didn't need to go too tight on the security side. On this side, there's checks and balances from that point of view. Avari from an insurance advisor point of view, Kinross from a supplier's perspective, problem gambling from a health professional's point of view. Lots of different examples, different fields that are being captured, different processes working behind the scenes through that. All right. Let's come back through our deck here. Forgotten password process. So this idea that I haven't gone to your extranet in quite some time. I don't remember my credentials. How do I get back in? We make that very easy. Just click the link to say I forgot my password. So I come to my sign in on the problem gambling site here. I can say forgot password, enter my email address, and what it'll do is it'll send an email, not with your password insecure. These are plain text emails that are going out. What it does is it sends a time expiring one-time use token. You click the link, you can then set your password, and then that token is no use going forward from there. Obviously, as I mentioned, we worked with SharePoint 2010, 2013, and now 2016, as well as Office 365, and all the above. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be all through those. The end user pages are all fully adaptive. So if we come back to our out-of-the-box experience for a second here, yeah, let's use this one here. So right now I'm in a desktop view. If I bring my browser size down, we'll see that scale to a tablet view, and then ultimately into a smartphone. So whether I'm on a mobile device or a full desktop device, I've got my hamburger menu here. We're using Twitter Bootstrap as the responsive framework under there. It works very nicely from that point of view. And mobile is so important these days. I mean, you need to make sure that your stuff works well from that point of view as well as from a desktop point of view. This idea of delegation, that who manages those external users, is something that IT doesn't need to concern themselves with. We don't want them to be a gatekeeper in the process. We want to delegate that access over to the business owners themselves. And I'll show you more about that as we get into the actual product itself. I'm going to pick up the pace here because we're getting close on the end of the hour time, just cover over the last few things. So as mentioned, you can install the product on premises, or we can host it for you in Azure. We provide 7/24 monitoring through a third-party NOC center, so it's all secure and managed appropriately from that point of view. Fully multilingual. Let's come back to these pages here. I can flip over to Francais. We've translated all end-user pages into English, French. Clients have translated them into many other languages as well. That's all done through resource files, so it's easy to update the text, not only from a translation, but even from an English point of view. That's something that you can do yourself. The actual licensing costs of the product, we talked about the Microsoft licensing. We keep ours quite simple. There's basically two flavors to the product, Standard and Enterprise Edition, in both a non-premise and a hosted version. The only difference between Standard and Enterprise is how many systems are you authenticating to. If you've got a single system, like one SharePoint farm, even if it's got 6 servers that makes up that farm, it's one production farm. That's one Standard Edition license required for that. If you said, well, we want to run a hybrid SharePoint 2013 and Office 365, and we've got Extranets in both of those, we want to use one EUM across both of those, that's an Enterprise Edition. Or you want to go to Desire to Learn or some other single sign-on, that's multiple systems, that's what defines an Enterprise Edition. So it's either 8 or 13K from an on-premise point of view, or $850 or $1070 a month if we're fully hosting that for you. Hosting includes software assurance, so updates are part of that. On-premise, there's a 20% annual software assurance. That basically gives you all the product updates. It also gives you licenses for dev and test. So if you've got a dev farm that you want to set this up into, you don't need to buy another license for that. Just keep your software assurance current, and you're good to go from that point of view. Lots of different clients. I won't go into all the details here now. Like I mentioned, we'll publish the deck up so you can have a look through that, organized by different sectors so you can get a sense of what that looks like through there. What I want to do now, though, is actually walk you through soup to nuts what that process looks like. So we're going to start on the SharePoint 2013 side, go from registration through to login. So you can actually go to these URLs yourself. The product demo13.envisionit.com is the one that I've been using. That's where we've installed things. So let's actually bring that up. So if I come back here, I'm in that site already. Let's go back to English because I'm not that strong in French, and say I want to register on the account. Let's actually take a step back. I come to the home of the site. The first thing I'm going to see is the login form, and if I don't have a current login, it's going to take me into the registration from there. So I've got a link here to click to go into the registration, and away we go from there. Let's start banging some information in. I'm going to put my name. I've got a bunch of test accounts that I use, so I'll use the next one in sequence there. The fields we leave is optional. I'm going to leave them blank. Another thing I have to fill in here is the CAPTCHA. If I get this right, go ahead and register. Thanks for registering. It's going to send me a confirmation email, and I'm going to need a second email once I'm approved to let me into the site. So if I go over to my inbox here, it takes a minute for those to come through. Let's see here. Okay, so I've got the first one that came through. So this is to me as the person registering, saying thanks for requesting an account. And I'll show you in a minute how we customize the look and feel of this email. There's a second one that's coming to me as the approver, saying, hey, a new account just registered on site. You need to review and approve that. I can wait for the email, or I can actually go into our administration console here and actually search for that user. Oops, timed out on me. There we go. If I do a search, I see there's my Peter Carson 3 pending approval account that just got set up through there. I can click that link and I can edit that user. So this is the experience the business owners would use. They get the email, would take them right to this page here, and allow them to review all the fields that were filled in on the registration and make a decision, is this somebody I want to let into my extranet or not? If the answer is yes, I'm going to change their status from pending approval to active, and I'm going to put them into whichever groups I have ownership of that will then grant them whatever permissions they need in the site from there. So we've got one called SharePoint that gives that user access into SharePoint from there. So I go ahead and save the settings. Let's do that again. And there we go, we saved that through. So now that I've set that user as active, a third email is going to get sent out, which is the welcome email. This is the one for me to set my password and let me into the portal. So I did get the pending approval one here. I'm still waiting for the welcome email. So here's the edit the record. Oh, and the other one just came in. There we go. So this is the welcome email welcoming me to the extranet, telling me my username, and that I have to set a password before tomorrow at this time. So we set a 24-hour expiry on this link here. Let me just copy this, because what I want to do is not put it into my signed in session. I want to put it into my incognito window here, which is my external user. So whatever password rules you have, in terms of length, complexity, reuse, etc., you set that in the underlying provider, and we surface those rules up through here. So I've used that token. I've set my password. Let me actually just resubmit that page. I try and use that token a second time. It says, hey, that token's already been used. If you still need to set your password, you can click here to reset your password. I can put in my email address, and we'll get a forgotten password email in a minute for that as well. But I already set my password. I know what it is. I come back to my home here. I use that pcarson3 address that I just registered, and the password I just set. And we have an optional disclaimer that comes up. So if there's legal disclaimer text that you want to present to users the first time they sign in, that comes up through here. Obviously, it's just lower minutes and text right now from an example point of view. We do fully audit this, so we keep a record of when people accept the disclaimers. In fact, we audit everything that's happening in the system. So every time somebody logs in, either successfully or unsuccessfully, did multi-factor authentication come in as part of that? User profile change, was somebody approved or activated? All that information gets audited in the underlying database. So from a historical point of view, we have all that information. So I've come through the disclaimer, and I'm now in our landing page. So this is a nice page to guide people into the extranet. I'm not in SharePoint yet. I'm still in Extranet User Manager. I'm not even really sure where I should be going. What it's done is it's looked at the SharePoint sites that I have access to, and it's built me a little tree. It says, well, you've got access to the top level site and this site called private. In fact, if I only had access to one site, I wouldn't even see this page. It would just redirect me to that site. So this is a nice URL to be able to give to people to say, just go here. Once you log in, it'll take you where you need to go from there. And if you've got lots of different sites and site collections and things, it keeps things organized for people from there. If I click on the private link here, I'm now into SharePoint, logged in as that pcarson3 user that we just created, and I've now got whatever features have been lit up in SharePoint from there. So we don't manage the permissions in SharePoint itself. What we do is manage the groups that those permissions are going to be assigned to. So if we come back to our admin console for a minute, we were looking at users in here, searching up that particular user, Peter Carson 3. In fact, I can even see from this view here what sites a particular user have access to, or even from a group point of view, If I look into groups and there's my SharePoint group there, I can see the sites that that group has access to. So it's not that I've given Peter Carson free access to that private site. I've made him a member of this SharePoint group, and that group has permission access in there. And that's a key differentiator, that this idea of using groups is a key feature. I come into that SharePoint group, I can see who all the members are, I could remove people out of that group if I wanted to, or I could add an owner to that group. So I could actually make somebody else an owner to manage the membership of this group. And they don't need permissions rights in SharePoint to do that. In fact, I probably don't want to give them rights to mess with permissions in SharePoint. All I want them to do is decide who should or shouldn't come into their particular site. And they do that through here, through the group membership. So if I've made somebody an owner, when they come into our admin console here, they don't see all this configuration stuff. That just completely disappears. All they see is the ability to search, add, and import users. That's all they can do, and they can make those users members of those groups. So they have a bulk set of users they want to bring in. They can download an Excel template. They can load it up with 100 or 1,000 or however many users they want to bring in. Import that in. It'll go through a validation, confirmation. Once they say everything's good, they say go. It actually creates all those user accounts and sends out all the welcome emails to all those people. So if you've got an existing extranet and you want to migrate to our product, you don't have the ability to bring users and passwords across as part of that, which hopefully you don't, because properly secured you shouldn't be able to in your old system. If you can export the users, you can bring them through this process to onboard them and bring them in. I can also define somebody as well as being a group owner to be a group editor, in which case, as well as being able to manage users, they have the ability to search and add groups as well. So we have different levels of roles that come in through here. If I'm a configuration editor, which is what I am right now, I get all these options. If I want to change what that welcome email looks like, how long is that token valid for, what's the actual HTML, and where do the placeholders show up in that, to do the mail merge to send that email out, I manage all that through here as well. So it's very easy to manage from that perspective. Okay, now I'm running tight on time here. We've only got a few minutes. I wanted to leave a few for questions. There's more that we can do through there. I mean, I showed you a bit of the the ADFS for internal users and how that works, where those users get stored and how they get managed through there. From an Office 365 point of view, I've already taken you through some of that process. I don't think we really have time to go through the whole registration and login. If we think back to the ocas.sharepoint.com example that we went through, we started the registration form. We didn't register a new user. We logged in. We ended up in Office 365 with those credentials that were managed through Extranet User Manager. Under the hood, what we're doing is we're actually using some Microsoft APIs to actually create accounts and assign subscriptions in Office 365 as part of that. So we manage that whole process through our product as well. In fact, if we look back at the admin console, I mean, we'll see Office 365 configuration options in here. What licenses do you want to assign? This one is on-premise, so it's not actually wired into 365. Where's your Azure AD, users and groups and such. So all that configuration is managed through here as well. All right. I've gone through most of these client demos. We talked about PHO, OCAS, Boys and Girls Clubs, the Marketplace, Supreme Court. Transamerica has actually changed names. They're the iCarry, but they're still using the product. I should update the details on there. Kinross and CAMH. So that gives you a good sense of kind of a broad smattering of different clients that are using it. Fair representation from a government and not-for-profit point of view, a couple there from a for-profit organization example as well. All right. Let me flip back over to our questions side. I mean, if you want to come online there, I'm not sure if you've got specific questions that you want to bring out, anything that anybody's been asking that you haven't been able to answer as we've been going through.
So we don't actually have any outstanding questions, Peter.
Okay, very good. Well, I get to give you guys a few minutes back to your day then. It's about 5 minutes to 11. From a next steps point of view, Amanda that was just on the line there is in charge of sales side of things. If you've got any questions from further licensing details, how do I get a technical one-on-one demo with our team or a business demo with our business owners, maybe setting up a trial version. We can actually host a trial. So if you come to our Extranet User Manager site, sorry, too many windows open. If you come back to our site here, you can actually request a free trial here, either as a hosted or an on-premises trial. We actually have a premium trial as well, where we basically will go through a hand process of getting the trial set up on premises for you. It's a $500 fee for that. We credit that back as part of the license purchase if you move forward from that point of view. So any questions from that point of view, please feel free to reach out to Amanda from that perspective. This is actually out of date. We've got to get the new webinar upcomings up on there from that point of view. And then we've got links to all the different sites that we've used through here. So as I mentioned, we're going to put the deck up on our site along with the recording. So if there's a colleague of yours you think could benefit from this, wasn't able to attend the session, they can certainly do that on demand, view the recording, or go through the downloaded deck from there. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and love to talk to you more about Extranet. So by all means, reach out, and we'll follow up from there. Thanks. Bye now.